According to her husband Donald, Miriam Algate had found the hairbrush whilst rummaging through boxes at the Moreton Spring Market. She had picked it up for a steal and for the first day or two had been absolutely obsessed with it. It was only on the fourth day that the changes began to occur. Changes that, 2 years later, would finally force Donald into the station to file a police report. When he first stumbled through the door, I was indignant. I had spent years listening to rumours that Donald Algate had killed his wife and had always dismissed them as nonsense. Now here he was, saying that he needed to talk. Was he really going to confirm those ridiculous whispers? As it turned out, Donald was not there to confess to having killed his wife, only to have tried to. What he was really there to do that night, the night he took me up to his woodshed and introduced me to Rapunzel, was to ask for my help in finishing the job. According to Donald, his wife Miriam had always been obsessed with collecting the paraphernalia of Victorian beauty and self-care regimes. From the pretty handheld mirrors made from mother of pearl to the hair fastenings, cutthroat razors used in barbershops, and powder cases used by the dainty ladies of the time. She had been overjoyed, he said, a few years earlier when he bought for her an antique washstand, complete with a pewter basin, gold-rimmed mirror, and holder for various small gadgets and hair tools.
She loved the spring market,
he said, because there was always the possibility of making some great discovery or uncovering some gorgeous little trinket that she could add to her collection. 2 years ago, at the market of 2022, she found an item that would become not only an addition to her collection, but the very centerpiece. The hairbrush was around 10 inches in length. It was cream-coloured and inlaid not only with mother of pearl, but with what appeared to be actual pearls at the cardinal directions. The bristles were firm and unworn, looking remarkably brand new despite being over 100 years old. Donald said that he could tell as soon as Miriam lifted it, cradling it gently and with infinite care, as if it were a thing of great value or an infant, that the brush would be coming home with them, no matter the cost. As it turned out, the brush was remarkably cheap. Either the stall owner was unaware of its potential value, or else he was simply bowled over by how much it clearly meant to Miriam and decided to give her an enormous discount. Whatever the case, after thanking him 1,000 times and positively vibrating with glee, Miriam wrapped her latest prize in a scarf and placed it carefully into her bag. For several days after that, Miriam seemed to be floating on air. It was exactly the piece she had been looking for to complete her collection. She had briefly looked at how much a similar piece might be worth, just to confirm to herself the extent of the bargain she had gotten, but had no intention of ever parting with it. It was, in her words,
"Such a beautiful piece. It'll go to my grave with me."
Unfortunately for Miriam, Providence had other plans. Having explained how enamored his wife was with this tiny tool, Donald took a long pause before continuing. He had come into the station that night claiming that he needed to report a crime. Assuming he was either drunk or having some kind of episode, I sat him down to listen to what he had to say, but did not shut the interview room door or start the tape on any official interview. Of course, there was a small part of me even then who wondered if there might be some truth to what he was saying. It was a well-known fact in Moreton, or at least a well-established rumour, which in a small town amounts to pretty much the same thing, that Miriam had left Donald more than 2 years ago. Up to that point, she had been a stalwart member of the congregation at the local church, and a regular at coffee mornings and other events organised by the parish council or the council proper. She was well known, if not well liked, and her sudden disappearance was noticed almost immediately. Stories of the pair arguing in public, with Miriam screeching at Donald to leave her alone and threatening to go away on her own, circled amongst those who were interested, and when he was seen around town without her, it was assumed that she had finally had enough of him and decided to act upon her threats. Could it be that Miriam had not left, but had instead met with some grisly end at Donald's hand? Looking at him now, small, bald, and looking as if he couldn't fight his way out of a wet paper bag, it seemed unlikely. But then, as many years in law enforcement have taught me, people can do all sorts of strange things if you push them long enough and with enough pressure. Everyone, they say, has their breaking point. It started about a week after the market. Miriam had said that the brush looked like it had never been used and had scoffed at Donald when he suggested that she might comb her own long red hair with it.
First of all,
she said.
This is a brush, not a comb. You brush with a brush, you comb with a comb. Second, it's far too valuable and beautiful to be used on just any old head. It's a thing to be preserved, not put to work.
Miriam was insistent on this point, right up until she wasn't. Donald says he came in to find her sitting on a stool watching herself in the mirror as she brushed her hair in long, careful strokes. He added that in that moment, slow, meticulous, and in her own little world, she looked like someone else.
I'd never seen her like that, and it was odd,
he said. The situation was not about to improve.
It started on her back and upper arms,
he said.
Red hair, not in little stubbly patches like someone growing a beard, but long, thin strands. I'd never seen anything like it. I didn't know hair could even grow that fast.
Donald said that he had been alerted to the problem when he had been shocked awake by the sound of Miriam screaming. She had gone into the bathroom, looked in the mirror, and realized to her horror that her arms and back had sprouted these strange patches of copper-colored hair.
Now, I don't know if it was something to do with the comb or brush or whatever, but before she used it, she'd never had a problem. After she used it, well...
According to Donald, Miriam spent much of the remainder of the day on the internet looking up epilation treatments, hair removal creams, and even clippers of the kind used by barbers in an attempt to remove her sudden hair growth as quickly and as discreetly as possible. She dared not go to the barber or a spa in town because as soon as she did, word would get out, and before the scissors had even been lifted, everyone would know that she had a problem. While she frantically searched for a solution, Donald had scurried off to the kitchen to prepare the evening meal and give Miriam the space required to fit and panic. When he came back into the dining room to tell her that dinner was ready, he almost dropped the plate he'd been holding. Unbeknownst to the distracted Miriam, in the time that she had been typing, the hair on her head had accelerated its growth. It spilled in a long red sheet like a waterfall over the back of the chair and pooled on the ground below.
I knew even then,
Donald said, that if she stood up, the hair would not only reach her feet, but would spread out for around a foot on either side as well. Seeing this, Miriam naturally screamed and implored her husband to take the kitchen scissors to the excess, which he promptly did. Crying to see the mess that had been made of her beautiful hair and somehow mad at Donald as if it had been his fault in the first place, Miriam stormed off to bed and slammed the bedroom door behind her. Donald spent the night on the couch. When he awoke the next morning, what he found in the bedroom looked nothing like his wife.
She was like an orangutan,
he said.
From her head to her toes, every bit was covered over with hair. Thick matted hair that fell down in these big thick sheets, like a yak or a sloth or something. She insisted that I cut it off and that she wouldn't go to our family doctor because word would get out and everyone would know. I cut off everything I could and drove her to see a private doctor in the city.
He said that not only had he never seen anything like it, but he had no idea how to help. He had her tested for all sorts of stuff and after a few hours came back with some results or other. That was when I really started to get scared. He said that we could cut the hair, shave it and try to keep it under control, but that we mustn't try to pluck it out. Then he showed us some scans he'd done. He said that unlike normal hair that sprouts out of the follicles or whatever they're called, this hair had sprouted in two directions. It had come out of the skin like normal hair, but it had also gone the other way, beneath the skin, and on that end, it was barbed. That is the word he used, barbed. He said that every strand was like a fish hook. The hair we were seeing was like the line, but the hook was embedded under the first few layers of skin. The doctor told Donald that pulling or tugging at the hair would likely pull flesh away with it. He said it had come away in chunks, that pulling the hair would basically tear her to bits. I remember hearing this and wondering whether Donald himself had gone to bits, but he presented me with a crumpled sheet of paper that he said proved it. The scrap contained a basic diagnosis, somewhat similar to what Donald had said, and was stapled to a number of prescriptions for emollients and steroid creams, aimed at easing irritation after the hair was shaved away.
Thing wasn't,
Donald said.
There was no way to keep on top of it. It just kept speeding up. No sooner would you cut it off than it'd grow back within the hour. We tried, God help us, we tried for weeks. But then one morning she woke up screaming and Well, the hair had started growing in her mouth, sprouting out all around on the insides of her cheeks, dangling down from the roof of her mouth. I was scared it was going to choke her. I tried clipping it with scissors, but it wouldn't budge, so eventually I made her open her mouth and put a lit taper in there to singe them off, just to keep her airways open. I had to keep doing it every few hours, and even whilst I was doing that, it started growing over her eyes, like eyelashes that grew inwards. At first they were just poking her and irritating, the ends jabbing at the white of the eye, but after a while they started to pierce and puncture it, jabbing through the surface of the eye and just squirming and writing inside. I remember her screaming one morning, and I saw her eye deflate like it had popped and it just leaked out, like a runny egg. That night she disappeared.
It was at that point that I put two and two together. For months, the kids in Morton had been telling spooky stories about some creature that was running around and howling on the moors. We'd had murder with similar stories a few years back, so I assumed it was something similar, but when one of the kids came in to report it, he said what he saw was the shape of a person, but all made out of hair. The kids had called this thing Rapunzel. At the time, I'd thought it was just a prank or the result of overactive imaginations, but now I had Donald sitting in front of me, giving me an explanation. He also gave me a confession. According to him, he had been out every night on the moor looking for his lost wife. A few days he had managed to capture her and had chained her up in the woodshed. That was where he wanted me to go, so I did. I figured that either I would be confronted with something the like of which I had never seen, or I would confirm that Donald was as mad as a hatter. When we arrived at the woodshed, there was no woman inside. Instead, there was an enormous pile of hair, the size of a haystack, heaped in the corner. Donald said that he had shot her, that his wife had been screaming, howling in pain, and that he couldn't take it anymore. He had, he said, brought me there to help him kill her. If there was any truth to what Donald said, then he had already succeeded. His explanation was that the bullet must have killed whatever remained of Miriam, and the hair had simply lost its human shape and returned to a pile. Unable to charge Donald with a crime, I let him go and assumed, as most people did, that Miriam had simply left him, and this delusion was his way of dealing with it. That was until around a week ago when Donald called me to his home. Having told me that he burnt every strand of the hair that remained of his wife, he led me into his back garden, to a plot where he said he had buried the accursed hairbrush. There in the center of the lawn and spreading outward like a huge weed was hair, red hair sprouting from the ground below and growing outward in huge tangles. Since then, Donald has poured petrol and set the weed alight every week, burning it to ash, but every week, without fail, it grows back. Worse still, according to Donald, each week it is different. It started as a small patch, but now it covers about a third of the garden. The rate of growth is speeding up,